I'm going to show you how you can transform any blank wall in your home by adding a luxury custom DIY wood slat wall in your home. And you're not going to have to spend a fortune to do it by buying those expensive wood slat panels online. Okay, so your first step of this project is going to be painting your wall black. I wondered at first if I could just leave it white behind it, and then I saw pictures from people who had made that mistake, so don't do that. It just looks funny. I don't know, it just doesn't make it look like the true wood slat wall that you're going to want to go for. I just got a cheap paint from Lowe's for this. Usually I use Sherwin-Williams for all my other projects, but for this, you can just do a cheap paint. Your next step, go down to your local hardware store and pick out your 1x2 select pine boards. You could also do this with a piece of plywood and using a table saw to cut each piece. That would save you some cost. I don't have a table saw, so I went and picked these out. They're $7 a piece. And for measuring, so I knew how many I needed, you can just measure your wall and then think about 2 inches for the wood slats and about a half inch in between. And then you want to make sure you have a couple just to be safe since they're not that expensive. Your next step is to prime and seal all of your wood slats. I had no idea what I was doing with this and I tested numerous stains until I finally had one that I liked. I used a whitewash stain that helps to get rid of the warm yellowish pine tint. And then for the stain, I used special walnut and I did do 3 coats of that, which we will get into.
What are you doing, Chloe? Hi! Tell him. Oh, you tell him.
Okay, so once I had done a coat of primer, then I went through with the whitewash. And this was kind of therapeutic, just going back and forth, but it was a little bit more time consuming than I thought. I used a staining sponge for the white. I felt like that is what worked the best. Just remember when you're doing it that you need to kind of pop that board up and do the sides as well, because if you don't, do the whitewash and the stain on the insides of the wood slat, it's going to defeat the entire purpose. I like having any excuse possible to be outside in the summers, but you could do this in your garage as well. I wouldn't recommend doing a stain anywhere in your home though. And just a behind the scenes shot here, I rarely make it through a project without having some type of mishap, and I spilled the whitewash before I was done. Only had one board left, but had to go to the store and buy a whole new one. So after I had gotten done getting the whitewash on the boards, I realized that I should cut them down to size. So this is something that I should have done at the beginning of the project so that you're not putting all of the sealant and the stain and whatnot on boards that you're just going to cut off anyways. So first thing after you buy the boards, measure the wall and make sure that they're all cut down to the exact same size. So your measurements are going to have to be very accurate with that. I just used my miter saw, which is, once again, I will always say this is one of my favorite DIY tools and something you should definitely add to your list. Moving on to the first coat of stain. I tried several different methods with this and I ultimately decided to use a staining cloth. That's what worked the best for me. So make sure you wear your gloves and then I would just dip that cloth in the stain. I would do both of the thin sides and then do the front of it and move on to the next. One thing to note though with staining cloths is be sure not to bunch them up and then keep them in a bag or something together. Make sure that they're able to lay out and dry. Otherwise they can become a fire hazard. This is what my wood slats ended up looking like after 2 coats because I was being very thin with the amount of stain that I was using because I didn't want the boards to soak in too much color. I think that I could have just allowed a little bit more and gotten away with 2 coats. But since I was so thin with the first 2, I had to go a little bit more with the third. And then I ultimately ended up with this, which I absolutely loved. I love how each of them are a little bit different because that's going to give you the dimension that you're looking for in a wood slat wall. You don't want them to all be exactly the same. Okay, so I could not decide what I wanted to do with this bottom section, whether I wanted the wood slats to just come down and it to be open. I thought that might look a little weird. I thought about turning this sideways and doing a board at the bottom, which you could do. What I went and got though was this piece of corner molding. And so I'm gonna cut it to fit and it'll sit right here in the bottom. I'll paint it black and then it will have all the wood slats come down on to there. So that's what I've decided to do. I would recommend adding this trim piece at the very beginning of your project when you paint the wall black. Oftentimes, when I'm doing these DIY projects, I'm figuring it out as I go, which is the beauty for you watching this back is that you're able to know all of the things you should do in the first place to do it right. I just secured it with my brad nailer, starting with the middle and working my way out. So, pretty simple. All right, and we are almost done. One thing that I missed recording was putting a sealer on the top of the wood slats, and so just used a regular polyurethane sealant, and I used a brush for that. In order to make sure that my spacing was correct for the wood slats, I bought a 1/4 inch MDF board. I cut it into several pieces, and then I used that in between each of my wood slats, as well as a level to make sure that they were perfectly spaced apart, as well as level as you're going across the wall. Your wall will most likely be easier than mine since mine was hanging over my stairs. And so I had to go up and down the ladder about 50 times. But nonetheless, this part is kind of fun because you just work your way from one side to the other one by one. And I used my brad nailer to secure all of them. I tried to limit the amount of brad nails that I did use though, because you are going to see obviously a nail hole with those. So I would start with the middle and then I would use my level to make sure that it was level and I would secure it in the top and the bottom. I really didn't have a solid plan on what I was going to do if I got to the end and it was a really awkward piece. So I don't have a lot of suggestions with that, but once I got over to that corner, then I started kind of just like lifting them up to see what the spacing was going to potentially be like. And I had to make a couple of them a little bit bigger than I would have, but I will say I think it is best practice to do that on the farthest wall away from where your eye kind of naturally is so that you don't notice that weird spacing. But you're going to have to figure that out in any wall because it's not ever going to be perfect. But mine ended up pretty dang good. Okay, my wall is almost done, but as you can see, there's a lot of little blemishes, one from the ladder that I had to use, as well as all of the finish nails. So I'm going to use a wood putty. I'm going to use a little tiny, whatever this thing is called. What is this thing called? Putty knife. I'm going to use a little tiny putty knife to spread it. And then I also have a marker in the color walnut that I am going to go over anything that might have been scratched but doesn't need to be filled in. Okay, so as I got this part of the project started, this is kind of like your final finish work. I threw away the putty knife. It was useless. So just use your finger and I would use that wood filler to fill in the spot. And then these are specific wood markers that are supposed to replicate whatever color you're currently working with. This just helps to remove any of those blemishes from the nail holes or like for me, my ladder there as best as possible. It's never going to be all the way perfect, but I guarantee you when you look at it on the wall, you won't notice it. I love that every time I come home, this is the first thing I see when I walk in my front door. This is one of many projects for this front entryway. I also redid my stairs, so you can look at my channel for that video. And next up, I'm going to be doing a gallery wall over here. So let me know in the comments what you think, whether you like the wood slat walls that are coming in or whether you don't. And if you have any questions on my process and anything that I can help you with, just let me know.